Manousso Musing with Lee J. Berman on Impasse as a Fallacy, Managing Emotions, Part 2. That is your topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hey everyone, this is attorney Mac Pierre-Louis, lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Łowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso, mediator, arbitrator, and trainer worldwide. And I am so excited today to have Lee J. Berman on Manousso Musing. He's one of the titans of mediation. His background is just outstanding. He's been recognized internationally for years from every major organization for mediation. He's a regular speaker. He's a master trainer. And his information that he has put together in his articles on Impasse as a Fallacy really is a game changer and a fabulous tool for mediators. So welcome, Lee J. Berman. We're so delighted to have you on the program as a titan of mediation today.
Barbara, that's the first time I've been called a titan, and I'm more honored than I can tell you. I feel like I should be some 600-pound giant marching through the streets or something when you call me that.
Well, you are, and you wear it well.
Thank you for having me.
And today you're going to talk about impasse is a fallacy, because this is something that you have really been able to harness and to share with other people on how to get through the fallacy of an impasse. And you bring to this table as part of your toolkit. Today you're going to talk about managing the emotions that are behind the impasse of a fallacy. So what made you, how did you see this? How did you identify how these were impairing the process of mediation?
Well, to the how question, Barbara, we talked about this briefly the last podcast you and I did together. We all did together. I did it like everybody else. I figured it out by doing it wrong so many times that I figured it was time to figure out a better way to do it. So, when people have explosive emotions or emotions that make them withdraw or that shut them down so they just can't hear, our job is to help them around those, because any of us, including we mediators who are so experienced, when we're in conflict, our brain reacts differently. Things fire differently in our minds, and we have different needs. And so I learned a lot, including from some of the experts like Doug Knoll and Ken Cloak, and dissected brains and all those sorts of things to learn about the mind and how it works. And it was one of these puzzles I wanted to get better at understanding so that I could be more effective in helping people through that moment. Now, having said that, not a psychologist, not formally trained or any of that sort of thing. A lot of psychologists and therapists turn to mediators, but that I come from business, so I needed to understand how to manage through emotions and help people be their best selves and make good decisions.
But you've done over 3,000 mediations. That's quite a lot of information that you've gathered. So what are your key points that you might share right now that are in this next 23 minutes?
So the first key point to me is about meeting people where they're at. I'm so sorry. Meeting people where they're at. And that means first, we have to know enough to figure out where they're at. So for me, I think of the brain, just for simplicity and quickness, I think of it in three basic stages. There's sort of the reptilian brain, the animal instinct, the am I safe, am I not safe? So to me, people, as I understand the brain, it kind of works hierarchically. So people have to feel safe before they can even experience and process their emotions. Because if they're not safe, that makes them shut down. And I'm pointing to the base of the skull, the top of the spinal column, where scientists say that part of the brain is located. Next is the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, where the amygdala sit, that trigger us emotionally. And this is where our emotions can get hijacked or can get so riled up that they interfere with our ability to think clearly. And then the third is the prefrontal cortex. It's really the part where we access rational thought and linear thinking and weighing good decisions and all those sorts of things. So to me, they have to feel safe and they have to feel emotionally understood and emotionally calmed in order for them to be able to be where we need them to be making good business decisions about the mediation that we're facing. So to me, figuring out where somebody is at is the most important place to start. And then addressing them with what they need to hear in that part of their mind that they're operating from. They're usually not choosing. It's involuntary. They get hijacked. But if they have this look like a deer in the headlights, I know they don't yet know that they're safe. So for example, to prime this, as neuroscientists would say, to plant the seed to help stay with them through this process, one of the things I do when I'm introducing the mediation process at 9 o'clock in the morning is I say something to them that sounds benign to those of us who mediate all the time. But I say to them, it's important to understand that nobody's going to make you do anything today you don't want to do. And when they hear that, you can watch their shoulders fall. You can see them, you can see them lift their chin, and they feel safe and empowered and ready to move beyond that part of the brain that's constantly nipping at them. Am I safe? Am I not safe? Especially if they're sitting in front of somebody who they feel has traumatized them or who they have a traumatic reaction to. So giving them that power back and meeting them where they are is the first part of, I think, managing emotions.
And knowing what you've just said, and what I feel about it is it resonates the Doug Knowles concept of emotional validation in this second step. Naming these emotions, accepting them, making them aware of their own emotions, of their own emotional state, because according to him, that's just less than 90 seconds for that, and they're immediately calmed down. So, and this is the part that enables us to go into their rational part, which according to him is only 2% of our perception. So you need to get through those 98 perception to get to this 2% that you really want to have in mediation.
So
But
you're feeling excited, Natalia, because you're connecting this to the podcast with Doug, who is a genius, and you're feeling like there's synergy to all of this, huh?
yes, absolutely. So my feeling is being excited, but my feeling is also that I want to spread the enthusiasm. So I'm showing the emotion that I want other people to catch from me. So I'm like imposing my emotion on others. However, this is exactly where my question was to come and to seek your knowledge on. We can manage other people's emotions so well in mediation, or at least we believe we can. But how about our own emotions? How do we manage our own emotions? What do we do?
Question.
We can't seek validation from the parties in mediation, and we are triggered sometimes.
Great question, Natalia, and ties in what we've been talking about, that we're human. We have our own emotions. We go through the parts of our own brains in that way. So we're talking about some of the other masters who I've learned from over my years, and Ken Cloak and Doug Knoll being two of them, but a third who was also one of the founding core faculty members of the American Institute of Mediation when I started it, way back in 2008. Is Jim Malamed. Jim, mediator trainer, was president for the first 20 years of a website called mediate.com. But Jim was one of my first trainers and made a big impact on me. And the way he taught me how to get through that when our own emotions are being triggered is he would call it the mediator's mantra. And he would say, it's their stuff. It's their stuff. And he would just remind himself over and over to separate ourselves from the problem they're having. And if you've done this long enough, you've had people at the table insult you as a mediator. I mean, I had somebody who was just one of these people who loved to push everybody's buttons. And at one point or another in joint session, because we had a lot to learn about this case, so we stayed in joint session to understand perspectives. At one point or another, he had every single person at the table standing up and screaming at him. And he just sat back in his chair like a puppet, knowing that's what he wanted, was just to mess with people. So when he got done with all of them, he turned to me and said, well, you're not much of a mediator. You're not even a lawyer. What are you doing here? Why are we wasting our time with you? And just tried everything he could to push my buttons. Best tool I've ever learned. And this goes for everybody in any setting. And I did a webinar on managing anger. In fact, it's on my YouTube channel. When somebody is blasting you, blaming you, calling you out, or just yelling at you, the best thing you can do if you're on the receiving end of it is step to the side, metaphorically. Leave your body here, but bring your awareness over here and take an objective look at that person. And from that objective place, as you're watching in your mind's eye them yelling at you, you can see them more clearly because you're not in the receiving blast of it all. Your consciousness isn't. If you're metaphorically standing over here, you're able to see, wow, this person's desperate. They've tried everything else and nothing has worked. So now they feel the only tool left to them is to do this to me. So what does that person need from me in that moment? And from that perspective over on the side over there, you can see they need empathy. They need to be understood. And they need some affect labeling like Doug Knoll does. They need it. So then I come back into my body, sitting here at the receiving end of all that yelling or blaming or whatever it is. And I say, instead of dealing with what they're saying, the content of it, Doug Knoll taught me, you deal with the emotion behind it instead. It's a choice you have. But by dealing with the emotion first, you can say, you're really upset about this. This is really important to you. You're upset at me right now. And just let them call it what it is and let them respond to you from that place. Because then you can go back later and fix the problem, the content problem with what they were saying and correct the things that they're saying that were inaccurate if you need to and things like that, or explain them better. But it's those two things. It's remembering for me that it's their stuff and it's getting out of the way of it and looking at it from a different perspective. And sometimes it's the inverse. Sometimes it's putting myself in the chair of the party who's being yelled at by the person across the table and feeling what they feel and then coming back to my neutral place and watching it from this unattached place where I'm not too detached, I'm not too attached to it. I'm just unattached and neutral and watching it and seeing which part of their brain they're in and answering them from that space.
Thank you for that. How do you account for, I guess, the loose ends, the lawyers who are involved who sometimes just mess it up? Okay, Natalia and I are attorneys, and sometimes we are representing a party in a mediation. Sometimes we're the mediator in a different kind of case. But I've noticed that it's the party's problem. It's their dispute. I'm trying to help these two, mediate and get somewhere where it can be transformative to the relationship. But then you have their attorneys involved who genuinely don't want some kind of rapprochement. They don't want some type of resolution because, well, let's call it what it is. They'll make more money by keeping these two more in conflict. How do you account for those loose wheels, those individuals who ultimately don't have a stake in the game, in terms of these people's lives, but they have to be there because they're the lawyers? What do you do when that comes up in impacting emotion?
So sadly, Mac, you're right. It does sometimes come up that it gets in the way and it does present in that way. I once had a construction case I was mediating, and the lawyer came to me and pulled me aside in a separate room and said, Lee J, kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I can't settle this case yet. The partner tells me the file's not thick enough. You know what I mean? And my jaw dropped. So I try to appeal to their emotions in one of two ways. One emotion, one rational, because one or the other is going to get to them, right? So the emotional piece first is, tell me about the day you went home after a mediation with the greatest feeling of satisfaction you ever had. And let the lawyer, one-on-one, separate in a private room, just the two of us, and let the lawyer tell me about the best day they ever experienced in mediation. And my sense is it's going to revolve around a happy client. So as long as that's the goal that we're headed for, then I can say to them, so it sounds to me like having a really ecstatic client at the end of the day is what gives you the most emotional satisfaction doing the work you do, right? Is that why you went to law school? Yes, right? The practical side, I'm a business person. So I say to them, tell me where you get most of your cases from. And most will say referrals. And I'll say, so if your goal today really is to secure the most referrals you can get, I'm not in your business, but it sounds to me like if I was, I would want not just my client to think that I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread and tell all their friends. I might even want the other client going out and telling people how great I was, right? So how can I help you maximize your referrals today here so that your business grows in the coming months? Because that's what I'm hearing you tell me is interesting to you, right? So what it is it's doing what we do. If you remember, if any of you saw the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, where the line of the movie was coffee's for closers, right? One of the things they put on the chalkboard was ABC, always be closing. For us, I think it's ABM, always be mediating. And so I'm doing nothing more with that lawyer in that one-on-one room by themselves than helping them explore their underlying interests, asking what motivates them, and trying to help them figure out how to get that here today in this mediation. It's just mediating like we were taught in our very first course. And it's not letting that lawyer's anger or appearance of greed or anything else that might be getting in the way derail us from always being mediating and just doing what we do and driving to underlying interests when they're shown to us, when they're available to us.
That's very practical information, Lee J. And that's something that happens so regularly in a mediation, and we know that. And we know that a lot of mediators, attorneys that are representing their clients, ask for separate rooms so that they can perpetuate the feeling of conflict and keeping the parties from eyeballing each other and finding the sweet spot and making it feel like they're in a more precarious position, because they do make it a position, than what the mediation, a good mediation, when people have that opportunity to hear and be heard, can help massage. So looking at mediation from the perspective of those attorneys who walk in and say, where's my room? Versus the people who let the mediator be the mediator and keep the parties in conference so they can do better work. How do you address this? How does that play in with managing the emotions and the impasse of fallacy?
It's a great question, Barbara. And I think in order to manage emotions, we have to first win the trust and the faith and the confidence of the parties, mostly in the room. The lawyers, as you said, they can be somewhere between experienced and even calloused, because they've done this before for so many mediations, dozens, hundreds, thousands, even some of them. And so they know how to play the game. So part of what I want to do is give them what they're asking for. When they walk in and say, "Where's my room?" I say, "Right over here." And I give them their room. I give the other side their room. And I go and I sit with them and I ask about, how was the drive? You parked in the building, okay, we'll validate your parking or whatever. We're going to keep you fed throughout the day. There are breakfast, snacks, and coffee, and lunch will be coming soon, and dinner if we need it. So don't worry about that. And if you need anything at all, just so I'm making them comfortable. And my mother is a Southern belle. She's from Tennessee. And she just taught me, when people are coming into your space, it's like your home. You want to be a good guest. So I make them comfortable. I connect with them. I ask their clients, so what business are you in? Or what do you do with, what are your interests and all that sort of thing? And I find more about them, and letting them talk about themselves relaxes them. And I always tee it up 99.99% of the time for bringing them together eventually. See, I think about it this way. The night before, the real parties and interest, the clients, while they're brushing their teeth, getting ready for bed, all they're thinking is, I got to remember to tell the mediator this, and I got to remember to tell the mediator that. And they're reliving the whole thing in their minds, right? Then they go to bed, they wake up in the morning, same thing. They're getting ready to come to the mediation. They're driving there. All they're thinking about is their argument. So part of what I want to do is decompress some of that, make them comfortable, give them the faith that they can trust me. There was a Sheryl Crow song called "Are You Strong Enough to Be My Man?" And I like to think about it as, are you strong enough to be my mediator? Because they think our job is to go in the other room and tell the other people that they're right. And so they have to believe we have that strength and that confidence. So then when I bring them together, even if all they'll let me do is cover the ground rules and my introduction, and we've talked about how I like to reframe things in the introduction a little bit differently than they've been framed before coming there. If that's all they give me space to do, and they won't come together to talk more about the case or creative ideas or any of that sort of thing, at least there are chemicals released in the brain, oxytocin, just from being in the same room, just from knowing what the other person looks like today, what they're wearing today, that they're hearing the same introduction and admonishments and promises and optimism and energy that I'm hearing. And that at 3 p.m, they've been going through this same very difficult conversation for the last 5-6 hours, just like I have. So even if they can't actually be in the same room because the lawyers get in the way, I let the lawyers have their way because I want them to work with me. And at times during the day, I'll bring the lawyers together, or sometimes just the clients together without the lawyers, with the lawyer's permission, depending on whether that's something that's important to do on that day in that case. Yeah. So I'm working within a framework that's as collaborative and together as I can construct it, but I don't put the iron fist down. I work with what they give me, and I want them to at least experience each other and me to a great degree in the first hour and a half of the mediation. But I don't do it when they first walk right in the door, because they're afraid from parking and finding the suite and all the nerves and everything else. I want them to have time to decompress first, and then bring them together when they're in a calmer state.
Well, Lee J. Berman, we know why you're a titan of mediation. Wonderful, wonderful advice, wonderful pearls of wisdom you've given us today on the impasse is a fallacy, managing emotions. Thank you for being on Manousso Musing. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank all of you, Mac and Natalia.